What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously, both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. Guys, real quick before we begin, just want to ask you a quick favor. If you can, please stop what you're doing and leave a review for the podcast. Whatever platform you're listening in on, if you can give us a 5-star or whatever the highest rating is, it would be fantastic. And even better, if you found it useful in any way, please write that down on a very brief review if that's possible. It makes such a difference to how the podcast is received out there and pushed out on various platforms. That's all, nothing else to ask. Now let's get on with the show. All right, guys, I'm going to start this week's episode with a short story about a good friend of mine who, I'm not going to name him, but this is a friend of mine who always has time for fun. He is always, and I mean always, away on holiday. He's always traveling. He's always going surfing or windsurfing or cycling or some sort of entertainment going on in his life. He lives a pretty envious life, if I do say so. And anyone who hears that and says, that's the kind of life I want, do you want to know what his secret is? Well, to kind of answer that very quickly, I can just explain that he has simply been very, very religious about funding his pension for his whole life. Since he was young, he was putting money aside into his pension. And he's an ambitious guy, worked hard, but was always careful to throw money into the pension rather than sort of living a very lavish lifestyle that he could have at the time. Now, I understand whenever I use the word pension, a lot of people's eyes, including my own, could start to glaze over. And I know there's a lot of reluctance for people to kind of even think about sort of starting a pension and things like that. But this is the one trick that my friend has really mastered that got him into this really great position he is, where he just has a fantastic lifestyle and he has this completely passive income that is pretty much guaranteed for the rest of his life. Now, why did he get involved in pensions? Well, because smart people tend to do this. Free money. When I say free money, I mean genuinely, if you get involved in a pension, if you start a pension at a young age, it is like basically picking up free money that is lying down on the ground. Now, a lot of people will wonder, what do I mean by that? There's so much tax benefits to a pension. You don't pay any tax on rental income. You don't pay any capital gains tax. The amount of money that you put into the pension is completely tax-free. When you put money in from a company, the company doesn't pay any tax on the money that was put in, and it reduces its tax bill as well. So you're basically reducing all of your taxes by putting your money aside into your pension. What is the one downside? Well, the one downside is you cannot access it for many years. But that, in a sense, is also the advantage, because how many of us are tempted to dip in every now and then to savings and things like that? And this is one of the things about a pension. It takes that temptation away. And so every penny that you put in, it sits there growing tax-free for years and years to come. My guest today is going to explain one of the reasons I wanted to bring her in is because she and her husband have bought 2 properties through their pension. And for a lot of young people listening, I do think you should pay attention to this particular episode, because this is your opportunity to get in line for that fabulous lifestyle at some point in the future. It's one of those things. My friend that I'm talking about earlier, he's just a normal guy, but he had an abnormal pension. And that is what has given him that ability now. For older people listening, you're going to find this particular episode interesting, because you may be interested to hear that it's not too late even to start in your 50s. Now, obviously, the younger you start, the easier it's going to be and the better it's going to be. But my guest today actually didn't start until she was in her 50s. And so anybody who is in the construction sector, if you're in the trade, if you're listening right now and you happen to be a carpenter or an electrician or anything like that, this episode is for you, because it is by far the easiest way for you to squirrel money away for your retirement. A lot of people will go out and they'll buy a property, and the reason they buy that property is because they want to have something for retirement. Well, don't have it for retirement in your name. Have it for retirement in your pension, and then get all of the advantages, tax-free money. That is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring my guest on today. And so without further ado, my conversation about pensions and property with Miss Christina Buckley. Christina P Buckley, how are you? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm good, Gavin. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks, Christina. For our listeners, I've obviously given a little bit of an intro, but for the benefit of the people listening in, why don't you introduce yourself? You're a property investor and you're a property developer, but you also do some consulting in the area of pensions and buying property in your pension and stuff like that. So I'm be interested just to, if you could share maybe a little bit about yourself and your background as a property investor. Like, how did you get involved in property in the first instance?
Yes, well, we developed property, I suppose, in 2005. We bought a site and we were going to develop it out just in relation to a house. And then we ended up looking at it to see if we could build more houses on it, So that's really how I suppose it started out.
And were you involved in property prior to that moment? What made you think that it was buying a site and building a house? That was the first time you ever got involved in property, was it?
No, well, John's family is, property, I suppose, and construction's in the blood. His father was a general foreman at CISC, Johnny Buckley, for 40 years. So I suppose the whole family are literally carpenters, plasterers, electricians. Every cousin, every relation, so we have a platter of trades in the family. So that's actually, I suppose, to buy a site and build a property seemed possible, but build 5 probably would have seemed impossible, but it was the crazy times it was at the time. And once we had planning, the site was worth €500,000, and then going down to the bank to borrow £1 million or €1 million, it didn't seem as such a crazy, I suppose, once we've added value through the site. So that probably, I suppose, got us started. And I often think sometimes, were we, when people say an accidental landlord, I wonder, are we accidental developers? Because, as I say, it wasn't our intention. But once we built the 5 houses, then we were really on a roller coaster ride to try and, I suppose, understand rental and tenants and tax and PRTB registrations and we're student specific accommodation there, so that's our registration, and you have to understand, I suppose, all the ins and outs of that.
Well, it sounds like 2005, that was the middle of the Celtic tiger, and everyone was kind of going crazy, borrowing money easily. It obviously wouldn't be so easy today to repeat that very same thing, but in terms of your decision, did you initially do that in your pension, or was that initially in your own name, or like that initial first deal? How was that one structured? Was it just in your personal names, yourself and your husband?
Yeah, so it was in the personal names. I wish it was in the pension. Now that, as I say, sometimes after 20 years in the property industry and developing property and renting property and doing renovations and refurbs and everything else and all that's involved with the banks and the ups and downs, the recession, I look back now and I do think, have we been maybe a busy fool, in relation to when I see the advantages of buying property in the pension. Obviously the tax-free growth in there, it just makes so much sense. So no, we actually bought those properties personally, and I often listen to your podcast when you were talking about, owned and everything personally. And it always, there was one particular podcast, it probably struck a chord with me, given that I had been through the recession as well. And I understood, hanging on by the fingernails we did. Yeah. we had 50% loan to values, and we had trackers, and we had everything. I mean, I'm very prudent, tick all the boxes. I'm bulletproof, but sure, look, nobody was bulletproof. But I always remember you saying you were talking to a guy, and he had all of his companies. He had all of his properties in companies, and you were literally had all your properties like us personally. And you were like, why are you so calm? And he was like, bank take them, the bank take them. I have my family home, I suppose, protected, and that makes a difference, doesn't it? So
I mean, the thing is what I kind of try to say to people is that, everything that you're doing at the moment is always, like the advice in the moment can be quite different to what it will be at some point in the future. So you can make all these great plans today, but a few years from now, you don't know what the regulations will be. You don't know what the law will be. They might bring in some sort of tax change or something like that. So you put your best foot forward, but you don't know what's around the corner. And I know that I invested in a thing that way back in 2005 or something like that. We invested in something and it was a 20% tax rate. So we thought, this is a fantastic investment. This is a great way to go and do this particular deal. And we did this deal. And then over the recession, there was these subsequent tax hikes that were brought in. And it ended up going to 40%. And then today, the same investment I started at 20% is now 60% tax for me personally. And so it's like, my God, like all of the advice that we got at the time was that this is a great structure. Fast forward 15, 20 years, and it looks like a terrible structure. So it's always good to kind of diversify, I guess, on that basis that you really don't know. However, well, let's not get off the track. I think that the talk about the pension is very important because there's a couple of things that you and I talked about just before pressing record in terms of, the way it can be used by trading companies and things like that. And so I think we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. One of the first questions that I want to get is there's a lot of people out there that will be reluctant at the idea of investing through a pension because there's a kind of a sense that if you do that, it's locked away, you can't touch it for years and things like that. And I mean, which is in a sense true, but that is also the benefit, is that there's no temptation there to dip in, and next minute you've spent all the savings and stuff. Tell us some of the pros.
Somebody said to me the word creditor unfriendly in the pension, which I thought was a good way of putting it. So, that can be an advantage, what people see.
If somebody goes after you personally, you can actually, your pension is completely protected, isn't that right?
They're less likely. They just say creditor unfriendly, I think is the term they use. But I mean, I presume that, yes, it would be difficult to access somebody's pension. It would make you a little bit safe, like what we were talking about, the investment companies earlier on. Not that anything would make you 100% safe, but I suppose safer.
Well, I'll just, like, one of the reasons why I wanted to jump on this topic is because I can remember back in 2000, I think it was probably around 2005 or 2006, and I was doing a big transaction with another chap. And this chap was very, very prudent and had a big pension. And he had started it before they brought in that 2 million cap. So this guy I think he had quite a few million in his pension. And I can remember we were looking at buying a building together. And I can remember saying, "Oh, this is a really nice building. Let's go off and have a look and talk to the bank about getting debt and things like that." And I can remember saying, like, "Listen, I'm talking to my bank about getting debt. You should be talking to your bank as well, just to make sure that we keep this deal moving." And he goes, "Oh no, I've been buying it through my pension." And I said, "Oh, are you going to use debt?" And he goes, "I know, I'll just buy it with cash." And I was like, "This is a building that's over, like, his share was going to be over 2 million cash, and he had that money just sitting in this pension, like, ready to go." And I can remember kind of just being kind of, whoa, like, that is really, like, just the fact that he has that much cash just sitting in his pension, like, easy to access. He could just jump in whenever he needed. And every penny that this deal was going to generate was going to be completely tax-free for him. So since then, it's been really, really kind of interesting for me, the idea of this. But I have spoken to different advisors, and I guess this is where you're going to sort of come in and clear up some of the things. But some of them were definitely suggesting that it was quite difficult to buy property through a pension, that there's a lot of restrictions, and that getting kind of the deal done is a lot of work, and it might discourage some people. So why don't you explain what's involved, and how did you sort of go through the process yourself, and explain like what are the different hurdles that are in the way compared to, say, just a normal transaction?
Yes, well, I suppose the first thing you have to consider is it is all arm's length, like you'll find a property and then you'll be able to ring your pension trustee and say, okay, we've found the property, and, maybe gone sale agreed, or he'll ring the auctioneer and they'll go sale agreed on it. So it is the pension company buying the property and not you. So I suppose that's the first thing. I suppose because it's been bought in the pension and it'll be mortgaged. Now, that's if you're mortgaging, as you said, that guy there didn't need to mortgage. And, a lot of people probably don't need to mortgage. It's something that I looked at and I just decided I think the gearing a 50% loan to value in the pension, with ICS de Lisk was who we dealt with. I suppose I am speaking, I will just, I suppose, reiterate, this is my own experience. So I'm not a pension advisor. I'm basically just, I suppose I can, talk about my own experience from that point of view. So this was my own experience buying 2 properties in the pension. We were a little bit late to this party. I'd always seen, I suppose, the advantages of buying property in the pension. And I'd always seen, I suppose, that the pension was a good idea because I was, I used to study ACCA, and I was, going to all the continuous progressive development courses. And like your story there, they were always talking about, that you could have up to 2 million of a standard fund threshold in your pension. And like when you think of that's a tax-free structure, it's where else would you put your money, I suppose, if you sat down and think about it?
Yeah.
For a lot of people, that's such a lofty amount. They think, well, look, that's crazy. I'll just rule that out. But I would try and urge people to access it by 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000. It doesn't really matter the amount. It's just benefit from it at some point in your lifetime. So in our situation, we found 2 properties, and they were actually next door to one another, and they had been empty for some time, and I was driving by them every day. So I contacted the auctioneer, and I gave the auctioneer then the pension company's details, and they basically secured the properties, and we went sale agreed. We had.
Can I just interrupt you there? So just to get an idea of the timeline, because I mean, you ring up an auctioneer and say, I'd like to put in an offer. But in this case, you're not putting in the offer. You're going and you're finding out what's the sale price. And then you're going to your pension company and you're saying, I found 2 properties that I would like you to buy on my behalf for my pension. Can you ring up the auctioneer and make an offer? And this, I've already spoken to them, and this is what they'll accept. And then you handed that job over to the pension.
I suppose we were sort of sale agreed, like obviously the auctioneer knew that we were buying the funds through the pension. So we had kind of agreed, we had gone sale agreed on it,
Okay. So the deal was off the market at this stage when you got the pension involved. Okay.
Pensions involved then at that stage. But obviously we had to do proof of funds and things like that. So that was obviously shown that it was the pension funds that were buying it. And then we explained that we were going to be doing some gearing on it, which the properties then, when the bank came out, they had a look at them and they said, okay, they're in a good area. They're going to rent very well. And, they're looking, I suppose, at the current market value of the property, and they're looking at the rental on it. They know it's going to be managed in the pension. And I suppose from the bank side of things, they have the little bit of comfort that, or a big bit of comfort, I suppose, that the rent is going to be rolling in and there's going to be no tax on it. So they know there's headroom in there. And I suppose the idea then, because it's non-recourse lending for the banks, and it's ring fenced then, and it's very I suppose the property company I used, the pension company I used was Grant Thornton Pension Trustees, and everything was in a unit trust. So I'd actually never seen something so broken up in different sections in all my life. I actually seen one property go into one unit trust, another property go into another unit trust, and then basically you had obviously your own pension account separate to that, and then the pension trustee. So myself and John, even though we were married, buying 2 properties in our pension, and we could have been complete strangers, because obviously it's managed by the pension trustee, and an auctioneer is hired, and you can recommend an auctioneer. And now that's not to say that they could go, they have to go with that one. But if you have property experience like I had, they took that on board, and I recommended an auctioneer that wasn't, obviously a family member or whatever. There is a lot of arm's length rules, and that's what puts people off. But it was
this is not something that you couldn't be buying something from your brother or your sister or something, or something from your husband. You want to kind of like put something into the pension that you already own. None of that would be permitted.
And that's a massive question at the moment. I'm on the committee of the IPOA. I'm on the board there, and a lot of the members obviously selling their properties that they own personally. And we're sort of saying to them, God, it would be fantastic if they could put their, probably the most asked question is, can I put my own property in? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. You can sell that property and buy the property next door and put that. I just see it to be very sad, people selling and getting out. And I just think maybe if they looked at the pension option, if it's an option for them. Obviously, we had a trading company, and we were able to fund our pension through that trading and build up the pension. As I said, we were a bit late to the party, so we had to use a mechanism that was called max funding, so that's based on salary and service. So they calculate your salary, they calculate your service, how long the company's opened, your age. We were 50, we wanted to retire at 60, so they were kind of saying, okay, there's only 10 years, you're heading for retirement, and you have to catch up on your fund. So we were able to get that revenue approved, then that max funding in and around, I think it was 175 each. The type of structure that we bought the 2 properties in was called a SAP. So it was a small self-administered pension. If you want to buy property, you want a non-standard PRSA or self-administered PRSA. And that seems to be the one now that has been changed a little bit in the Finance Act.
For the people that are listening here right now, the structure that you used is no longer available, but there is still structures available that would allow people to make investments into their pension. In terms of the benefits, we were talking about this earlier. So let's say you're a carpenter or a plumber, and like everyone at the moment is out the door with work, they're flat out. And so theoretically, you're doing quite well at the moment. You're making some good money in your company, and the company, the cash flow is building up. A question I get a lot from my listeners is that you've got, should I buy through my company? Because they've got cash sitting in the company. So they're thinking to themselves, I'm sitting on 60 or 70 grand. Should I use that as a deposit but get the company to buy it? And what it sounds to me like a far smarter, more prudent thing would be to put that money into your pension, which is completely tax-free. And it would also mean that you don't actually have to pay the 12.5% trading tax, because that's removed as well from the tax net. And so instead of having 70 grand, you'll have the original 80 or 90 or whatever. You can put that into your pension, and then you can use that pension to go and borrow and buy a property. Is the funding or the mortgages and stuff through a pension, is that still a route that is possible?
Yeah, so just to answer your question there in relation to the construction industry, I think it's a very good industry that should maybe look at this, because when I was in the Crow Park Summit there with the pension summit recently, they did say that there was some concern raised about, I suppose, people retiring earlier and maybe living longer. And the construction industry is one industry where the guys do tend to, and girls do tend to retire earlier, maybe.
Yeah, you're not walking around scaffolding in your 70s, typically speaking. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so pension was more important, and it was a couple of big construction companies there discussing their concerns for their staff, and they were saying the pension is probably more important in that industry, for that reason, that they tend not to work till they're 65, and, because it's such a physical job. So yeah, I think construction is a great industry because it's a trading industry and a trading route to fund your pension if you're self-employed or have a limited company. Now, it needs to be a limited company. Then the employer will always be able to put in, the employer director will always be able to put in a much higher sum than the employee director, So if the employee was to try and fund their pension, let's say they're under 40 and the cap on the salary is 115, they at 20% would only be able to put in 23,000, but the actual employer would be able to maybe put, we'll just say, for example, I know it sounds a lot, but we'll just say, for example, 100,000. So if the employer was putting in 100,000, the employee is getting a much larger contribution. So that's something that maybe if it's their own company, speak to the accountant. If it's a board and there's other directors, there's other considerations. If there's shareholders, these things can get very complicated depending on how big the business is. And I suppose all of that has to be checked with the accountant, but that would be the route I would be taking. And I suppose the most important thing I want to say there, because it's the first thing that came to my mind, is that you don't want property in a company, a trading company, because if you're going for retirement relief or entrepreneurial relief, and I'm just seeing this from my own point of view now, as I say, always looking at accounts, it just makes the company messy in relation to an investment company there. It's a different tax rate, it's rental, it might affect something as huge as retirement relief. They could be aiming to take that 750 out at retirement relief and pay no tax on it, and then be told, well, you ended up with a couple of properties in there, it muddied the water, and you're not a clean case, or you're not good to go, and you have to do something else.
That's the thing I've said multiple times when I get asked that question is, first of all, look at the pension, but second of all, whatever you do, don't buy the property with the company that you're out doing the work in, because that it does muddy the water. But also, if you say you make some sort of an error or your mistake, and somebody decides, I'm going to go and sue that person for the job they did in my house or something, now suddenly you have a property there that looks like it's worth going after. Whereas you could have that in a separate entity, and the trading company could simply lend the money over to the entity, and that's it. You've solved that problem. But you'll still have a lot of tax. That's the problem.
Yeah, most people would have, the kind of umbrella of companies. If they're going that route, they might have their trading construction where they'll do all their refurbs. And then, as you said, that they generally try and keep that quite lean and mean, I would say, if people understand that. And exactly for the reason that you're saying there, it's a working thing. It's like your working current account, I suppose. Yeah. And your investment company then might be the separate one where you'd hold the assets, and then they might have a holding company above that. So that structure is quite efficient, when you have a big enough amount of properties to do, Tell
me this, Christina. One of the things that we were chatting about before we hit record was that and this is something that's in this market, a lot of people out there will be thinking, it's awful competitive, this market. Like if you go out to buy the 3-bed or the 4-bed, you're up against tons of different people. You mentioned a case of somebody, of a company, and it had a number of directors, and they decided, let's go and buy that apartment block, and the company essentially makes the offer, but the purchasers are actually the pensions of all the different directors. And so you end up with 4 or 5 directors, each owning 4 or 5 properties in an apartment block. And it means that the company controls the building, and the owners are basically all in those different pension funds, different buckets, we'll say, that own it. And so you get the benefit of if the property is not kind of out there in the general public. This is actually controlled by you and your colleagues, but you're doing it in a super tax efficient way. That was really interesting.
Well, it's controlled by the pension company, and it would be managed by an auctioneer, But I suppose the tidiness maybe of having those 4 apartments, let's say on first floor, and then, maybe the guy that owns the next 4 apartments and the guy that owns the next 4 apartments. So in a situation where it was 12 apartments, and this was what they were actually going ahead to try and do now. They're in the process of doing it, so it hasn't completed. So I wouldn't sort of, I suppose, flag that as possible until it's done.
Right.
But they are actually looking at buying 4 apartments. They're separate folios, so the pension are happy with that. They can get hearing on the apartments because they've had a look at them, and they've said yes, they're in a good area and they're going to rent well. And then in relation to the other directors, then are looking at buying the other apartments in the block. So they'll all be separate through separate pension companies, even if they all had different pension companies. If they had, one was ITC, one was Newcourt, one was
Didn't matter.
Grant Thornton Pension Trustee. It doesn't matter. You're buying separate folios, separate apartments, and you're basically doing what you were saying there earlier on. That guy is doing, picking up the phone. He's ringing his pension trustee and he's saying, I've got a self-administered pension, which is really the key, because you get to say what you invest the money in. And it's not just property. If you want to invest the money in stocks and bonds and shares, or you want money invested in. So that's a very interesting space, because, as you say, it takes you out of the market where it's very, I suppose, overheated, and you might be able to look at the bigger apartment block. And the real, I suppose, catalyst there, and the reason that that's now probably possible as well, is because if the employer is putting 100,000 into the pension for the employee, because of the changes on the 15th of December in the Finance Act, last year there would have been a situation where the employee would have been charged benefit in kind.
And that's removed now.
And that has been removed this year. So employers now are in a position to be able to put maybe a lump sum, because the cap has been removed as well, bar the standard fund threshold obviously is still there. So there was big changes made around the 15th of December in the Finance Act, I suppose, to make the PRSA and the pension more amenable to a lot of people, and for employees as well. Great progress has been made around the pension, and people have to keep an eye on it, because there is some really good changes coming down the track. And I think it is to encourage people to put money into their pension to whatever they want to invest in. So I know yourself and myself, Gavin, love property, but I will be honest, they see it as a very illiquid asset, that might need to be sold at a bad time, where values might go down, or
which is always a risk, But like, the thing is what I think is great about it is, this is effectively free money that it's lying there. You just have to pick it up. And it's like no benefit in kind. That's huge. The fact that there's no cap there, that's huge. The fact that most people that are trading out there, the profits sitting in the company, it's already a low taxation situation, because it's only 12.5% tax in a company. But you can actually remove that even as well, and just keep, the bare bones that you need to kind of keep the company going. So it's free money. I think probably one of the things that make people reluctant to use a pension is just the fact that they think, this is like a black hole. You take your 20 grand and you throw it in to this company, and we'll manage it for you. And then, oh dear, the stock market went down. I'm sorry, your 20 grand's only worth 15 now. Like, that would have been the perception before, and they're taking fees and they're doing. But if it's a self-administered pension, like you're talking about, you put your 20 grand in, and the 20 grand sits in a bank account, and it doesn't have any expenses except for your pension cost for running the pension. And you decide what to do with that. So if you put 20 in and you do nothing this year, but then you put another 20 in next year, now you have 40 grand there. You might decide, that's a deposit I'm going to go and put on a property or something like that. And everything is completely tax-free. One of the reasons a lot of people are pulling out of the market is because of the taxation, and the fact that, there's quite a lot of tax on landlords. So if it's through a pension, that's a further, benefit, I guess, towards landlords.
Yeah, sorry, just on that point there, I see buying property through the pension as a very good solution for landlords if they have access to the company, either through a trading company and now actually I believe even an investment route. So that's quite new as well, and that might be around some of the changes. If they have a salary on their investment company, there has to be a salary obviously in a limited company, an investment company, but it's always been a trading route. But there now looks like there may be avenues in relation to that, so that's very early days on that as well. But the PRSA, if it's a question that it's there's an employee-employer relationship and there's a salary established, it may even be a route from an investment company now to invest in their pension, which I think would be fantastic. Pension is a long-term structure. So when I speak to members of the IPOA and I ask them, why have you bought a property? They generally tell me that they've bought a property for their pension. They're worried about, when they get to,
they get older, yeah.
And it's, poverty at that age and not working and maybe not being able to work or bad health. It's really a concern, and it kind of, is a big issue to them. So that's why they bought the property, So I'd be thinking, well, if it's for your pension, why isn't it in your pension,
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point.
With the pension, everything is seen. So the two properties I have in the pension, they'll basically send me an email and say, this is the insurance quote. Are you happy with it? I'll get an email, CC'd probably on an email once a month. And the auctioneer will say, this is the rent gone across the Grant Thornton. This is the expenses. This is my fees. And, whatever else is going on, So you're very, it's self-administered. You are the beneficiary of the property. So you will be kept informed and you do get to have a say, I suppose, as to what happens to it.
Provided it's at an arm's length, yeah.
Yeah, it's let to somebody, you use an auctioneer and it's let to a non-connected party. That's very, very strict rules. But I see the rules like looking through a window. It's 100% clear, There's no surprises with the pension. It's very clear. It's very well spelled out. Like at the end of the first year, they valued the property, they looked at what was in the pension, they minus the debt, and then they charged whatever percent, I think it was 1%.
And tell me this, Christina, in your particular case, you have two properties and they're actually HMOs, they're multi-room properties. So a lot of people might have thought that wasn't a runner, but that's how you went about it. So you have a pretty good return coming from your property. And that is managed by the auctioneer that you've brought in to look after the collection of rent and things like that, is it?
Yeah, so the pension company don't, I suppose, allow renting per room. So just to be clear, I bought big properties. So one was it was a bed and breakfast originally. So that's the one that has the 8 bedrooms in it. Okay. And the other one is a 6-bed. And that was a property built probably about 25 years ago. And it was built on the site. So it had a big detached property. So they're unusual on their size and certainly unusual in our area. I searched a long time for a nice big property. I wanted a big property and I hadn't got the funds for the pre-63 on the South Circular Road. So I had to go looking and we were very lucky then to find these properties. So the way they're rented is through the pension. It's a standard lease, so okay. They're near a hospital, they're near, and we kind of, the auctioneer then let to a group for the 6-bed, because that was 6 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Oh, yeah, 2 bathrooms. And then the other property had 8 bedrooms and 8 bathrooms in it and a WC downstairs. So it actually had, because as I say, it was structured as a bed and breakfast originally. So that kind of was let then to a company, and the same thing, it was right. Let lease,
So it's effectively, it's a HMO, but rather than you collecting money from individuals, you're renting it to a company who gives it out to the 8 people that working for them, or whatever way they want to kind of organize it.
Yeah, the company, it's a corporate let on the bigger property. So the company then takes the lease. So the auctioneer rents it to the company. It was a foreign company and they wanted to bring over their staff and they wanted to make sure they'd be all secure in one place, and they were able to give them 2 cars or whatever so they could come site, and it worked very well that way. So
that's a very clean way of doing it, actually. Yeah,
to a company. So for the RTB registration, it has to be a lease, and in some cases, obviously, if it's a commercial property, a license. But just to be clear, it can't be rented on a room by room basis or on Airbnb, which is something that has come up time and time again, because Airbnb is a trading aspect. That's like a hotel, and you can't have a hotel in your pension. You can't be trading in your pension. So if you buy a big property, you have to look for the right strategy, or have your auctioneer look for the right strategy in relation to renting that particular property, you know. So as I say, the both properties now are let, and they are returning very good yields.
In terms of, Christine, I mean, just you're in the market and you're on the IPOA, like what is your view, just kind of changing the topic slightly, like what's your view on the market at the moment? Like, how do you see things playing out? You know, we're in a housing crisis, but at the same time, the affordability has been, you know, getting worse. And I know one of my listeners wrote to me recently, and they have a HMO, and they said that it recently turned cash flow negative for them. So it was the first time that I'd heard that, and I was kind of thinking, oh, okay. So just opening it up to you, what's your view in the market, and do you see it going up or down or sideways, or what would you think?
I suppose because I've been in the market a long time, and I've seen the ups and I've seen the downs, it's just another cycle to me, you know. Yeah. I still think property is you know, it's a good idea to buy property, and I still think it's a good idea to rent property, but you have to be active, you know, you have to really work hard at it. A lot of people think it's passive, you know, and unfortunately it's not. And I always try and look for, well, what can you do? You know, a lot of people spend an awful lot of time and energy raging against the machine and saying, you know, we can't do this, we can't do that. So, you know, instead of all of those things that you can't do, let's look at what you can do.
Yeah.
You can property in your pension. I think they'll borrow, the lending is at 80,000 from ICS to LIS. So technically, if you had 200,000, if you had 100,000 in your pension and you borrowed 80,000 and 80,000, that's 160. And I was on the Liberty Blue webinar down in Waterford, and I was blown away at the great value properties they have, because people would say to you, you can't get anything under 200,000, are you mad? But the rental yields as well were very good at 1,000, 1,100. City centre property is really good. So I was blown away at the value there. You have to find the good, you know, there's no point.
You have to go out and look. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, if you're living in Dublin, you won't have heard of a property for, you know, with any value. But if you look outside of Dublin, there's actually tons of value out there. And the yields, I have a friend living in Carlow town, and he's bought like 5 or 6 properties in the last 2 or 3 years. And those properties are yielding 15 to 20% in terms of, you know, a gross yield. So, and that when you say that to somebody in Dublin, they think, you know, there must be something wrong with them. Do you know what I mean? Because how could it be so high, you know? But that is actually what's quite common outside of the kind of the big urban centres, you know?
Yeah, you do have to look at the right property and with the right hat, I always say, you know, like when you bought your family home, you had one particular hat on and you were looking for the south facing back garden near the right. Yeah. You know, all the rest of it, you know, you take that hat off when you're looking for a buy to let, and then when you're actually looking for a pension property, you take that hat off and put another one on again, because even a buy to let is different. I did have one lady I know that was looking at buying a property down in Limerick, and she picked an absolutely fabulous property. It was about 10 miles outside the city. It was a, you know, detached, it was a bungalow, it was fabulous, like room for a pony. I said to her, you know, fabulous. Unsuitable 100% for buying in your pension. You would be better off buying something in the city, or, you know, within commuting distance of, you know, a big city, or, you know, this place, that place. And sure, I ended up showing her something that was 2 up, 2 down in Germany, and she just thought I was absolutely off my rocker. But I thought she was off her rocker, because at the end of the day, this is a pension property. So you're trying to buy something in your pension that's going to rent, and you know, properties
appreciate in value and stuff. massive, yeah.
15 minutes, 20 minutes on a bus route to the city, or 5 or 10 minutes to walking distance to Lewis, is going to be a much, much better. It's the rent roll I'd be more concerned about in the pension than nearly the value. Obviously, you want capital growth. I mean, who wouldn't? And that'll go into your ARF. And when you pass away, I suppose the ARF then is inherited by your family, so your estate, and that's quite tax efficient as well at 30%.
For people who don't understand the reference to ARF, can you explain that?
Yeah, so it's an approved retirement fund. So you will basically open your PRSA or whatever type of pension you have, and then that will basically be the mechanism that'll run, let's say for me, between the 50 and the 60. And then when I basically get to retirement age, then they will say, okay, 60 now, we're now converting it. So would you like to sell the property at that stage? Would you like to move the property into the ARF? Now, I suppose I would like to draw down, obviously, the 25% tax-free lump sum. Who wouldn't? It's probably the only tax-free lump sum you're ever going to get. So you'd like to take advantage of that. So you'd have to say to yourself, well, is the cash there? Is there enough cash there to do that? Yeah. And move the property into the ARF. Now, your mortgage on the ICS Delisk mortgages are 15 years. So you will have a situation where you could move the property with the remaining mortgage still on it into the ARF, So that's your approved retirement fund. At that point, you can draw down between 4% and 12%. So at 4%, we're looking at maybe 25,000, and my husband will be looking at about 25,000 as well. So that's kind of, the way we're looking at that. And we're saying that would work out really well with the tax-free lump sums if we had any mortgage left on our family home, to maybe clear that, have a lump sum in the bank, and have them then
comfortable. Yeah.
And they could be maybe 8 years away from actually drawing down the state pension as well. So that's the other thing. People are living longer. At the pension summit in Croke Park, they said that anybody after the age of 2000, which is my two sons and probably a lot of people's children, after 2000 is going to live statistically till 100. So that's very interesting. So, I can see that generation wanting to retire at 50, and then they're going to live till they're 100. So they'll have 50 years to fund. So pensions are only going to get more important, not less important, as time goes on. And people have to look at it, look at their pension, look at what's in the filing cabinet, take it out, have a look at it. If they've had a couple of jobs and they have a couple of pensions, talk to a financial advisor and see, can they be amalgamated into one? Because that's another thing people tend to forget about them and just think, well, I can't do anything with that. And if your pension maybe in your job is a particular type of pension that you can't, be self-administered on, you can't, say where the funds are invested. There is other structures that are big structures or big companies that you can't do that. Maybe you can open one personally and have your own pension. I see this, I suppose, where I'm quite passionate about it is I see this as, why aren't we leaving school with a pension account? It's the bank account. It's actually a bank account. Now, it's a bank account you can only put money into and it doesn't come back out, But, I think if every Leaving Cert student left, secondary school with, a PRSA bank account and understood that this is their money, this is their funds, this is their life, and then when they get targeted at the higher rate of tax around the 40% mark, if they were to channel that money into and then even as you were saying earlier on, the likes of having 10 or 20,000 in the pension, there's plenty of things you can invest in. You could say silver, or I know the property bridges, peer-to-peer lending at 10,000, can I get 8% or 7% return? I mean, some things obviously more risque than others, but, depending on what you want to do, stocks and bonds and shares, even, somebody of that age getting an understanding of the stock market by investing through their pension and growing their pension and being there when they're 50, saying, well, I did that, I was involved in that, that's something I did.
Tell me this, Christina, in terms of, I know we're getting towards the end of our time here, I'm going to be asking you if people want to reach out. But before I do, my final question is, what advice now in your 50s would you give to your 20-year-old self if you had the opportunity?
Don't buy a house and a business when you're 21, because that's what I did the year later. No, I don't regret that. I have to be honest. Probably had a lot less holidays than some of my friends, and definitely didn't drive a fancy car until now. It's probably the first time I ever bought a new car in the last few years. But yeah, I don't regret that. That's probably been the making of us, being entrepreneurial and setting up a business young. And I loved that the fire that comes with that young age, and just, nothing is impossible. You can do anything you put your mind to,
Mindset is critical.
That is so key. I was actually looking this morning at a picture I have. I'll send you the picture. It's but Pauline McCardle. She's a local artist here in Dublin 12, and she did a fabulous picture from me of the giant causeway, and you'd have to see it. And I know this is going to be lost in a podcast, but I'll send you the picture to put up on your website. But you can actually see all these steps, up to beautiful, serene pasture at the top of a hill. And when I look at it every day, it motivates me, because I just see all the little steps you have to take in life to get where you want to go. And I just sometimes wonder, well, where am I on this, process now? Am I here? Am I halfway up the hill? And what really makes me curious is you can't see what's over the hill. So I'm looking forward to the day of actually making it to the top and looking over the hill and seeing what's there. I'll have to get her to draw me another picture and say, okay, what's over the hill? What's
on the other side? Yeah, exactly. Christina, thanks so much for your time today. If people wanted to reach out, I know you do a bit of consulting for companies and stuff like that. What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, so you'll see there, I'll send over to you my email address and my website, and I have a calendar link thing then as well.
Oh, so someone could book in a time.
Yeah, there's a scan code there. If you hold the phone up, it'll bring you straight into my calendar. And I really just advise based on what I've done, and I try and demystify it, because you are going to need a group of professionals to do this. You're going to need your pension trustee, you're going to need your financial advisor, and you're going to need your accountant. But I mean, when you think of putting a team of those people together around you, or even talking to the likes of myself, or anything that you're afraid of or worried about or don't want to say out loud to anybody, because there's a lot of things. And I know going through the process myself, I even found there was an awful lot of things that I was nervous about, and as I say, I have the accountancy background, and I have the understanding of the pension and property, and it was still daunting, so if you could actually talk through somebody that's gone through the process and they can explain it to you, I think that can be very valuable. And I'm happy to help. As I say, the consultations calls is probably the smaller part of what I do, but at the same time, I'm very passionate about this space, and I do think it's opened up for some great advantages at the moment for people to take once they know that it's now there, that the advantage is there, and they need to see it,
Brilliant. All right, Christina, I'll put the link to your email and your website and stuff in the show notes. And if you're watching on the video, guys, I'll be putting the picture that she described up on the screen, so do check that out. Christina, thanks so much for your time, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thanks very much, Gavin. Thank you.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Christina. Thank you so much for listening. I do wish you all a very successful week. Keep working on that business and that investment and that in mindset, and I will see you back here next week. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via the Facebook group that is called Behind the Facade Community. Alternatively, you will find me on social media. My handle is Gavin J. Gallagher. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the various projects I'm working on over on my website, gavinjgallagher.com. And while you're there, please do add your name to the Join My Tribe thing over on the right-hand side. This will ensure you're kept up to date via my weekly newsletter. All of these links are in the show notes below. That's all for now. I will see you guys in the next episode.